Dear guests, friends, and fellows of the Villa Aurora and the Thomas Mann House, a very warm welcome here in the living room of the Thomas Mann House to our very special student count in-person meeting on the topic democracy and vulnerability. And we have two wonderful guests from Germany, Cecil Leonard and Josephine Hart, also known as Radikale Daughters. The Student Council is an interview series that has been running since 2022, addressing the themes In Search of Truth in 2022, the political mandate of the arts in 2023, and democracy and vulnerability this year. It is a monthly, usually online event series in collaboration with the Vande Museum of Cold War in Culver City, Dub Lab Radio, and the Thomas Mann House Los Angeles. The council is a team of highly engaged, talented, and diverse students from across the US, and you can see them already sitting in front of me. And they are engaging in conversations with artists, historians, journalists, politicians, activists, and many others. And we are very excited to have you all here. Zora has just flown in from New York, and the others are more or less Los Angeles based. My name is Oliver Hartmann, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the director here of the Thomas Mann House, and we are a residency center and space for transatlantic debates in the heart of Pacific Palisades. We run, and it's also, I don't forget to mention this, but of course it's the former exile home of Nobel Prize winner and writer Thomas Mann. We run a residency program where we invite every year around 15 scholars, outstanding personalities from Germany, to stay here with us in the house, to work on their projects. And we bring them also in a dialogue with the local communities, with artists and other scholars here in Los Angeles. We organize a lot of public programs each year, such as our podcast and video series, 55 Voices for Democracy, or as today, our Student Council. And all our programs aim to addressing contemporary and future-related issues related to politics, art, society, and culture. And we do this in the spirit of Thomas Mann, who during his time in California dealt extensively in his writings and lectures with the vulnerability of democracies, democratic renewal, fascism, migration, exile, and others. Before I hand over the mic to you, Sarah, I would like to thank our team, Benno Hertz, Program Director, Clara Tang, who is unfortunately sick, our project coordinator, also Betty and Emma, who are helping us behind the scenes, and also our institutional partners, Jos Sechal and Tina Siegel from the Vande Museum, Alejandro Cohen from Dub Lab Radio. Dear members of the council, dear Ceci and Josephine, it's so great to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our 7th discussion of the Democracy and Vulnerability series hosted by the Vande Museum, Thomas Mann House, and Dub Lab Radio. My name is Sarah, and I'm very excited, along with my fellow student council members, to welcome Radikale Töchter, or Radical Daughters, to our discussion. So first, I think we'll just go around and have each student council member introduce themselves, and then we'll proceed with our introduction and discussion. So would you like to start?
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Jones. I am a curatorial assistant at the Vende Museum. I am also a PhD student at Claremont Graduate University, and my work largely revolves around comparative fascism.
I'm Sarah. I just graduated from UCLA. I studied art history. I specialized mostly in Cuban graphic political art and political graphic art in general. And I also just recently started as the collections intern at the Vende Museum.
Hi, I'm Zora. I'm a rising senior at NYU, majoring in instrumental performance with a double minor in media studies and creative writing. And I am the honorary East Coaster, but I've been a part of the council for the past 2 years now, and really glad to be back.
Hi, everybody. My name is Baruch. I am a soon-to-be junior at UCLA. I was studying applied math. I'm currently switching to cognitive science. This is my first year on the council, and I'm very excited for this in-person discussion.
And hi, everyone. My name's Lexi. I'm a rising junior at the University of Pennsylvania studying poli-sci and art history. And I've been on the council since 2022 with In Search of Truth. So I'm just happy to be here today and to start talking with everyone.
Amazing. Thank you all. And I'm now very pleased to introduce Radical Daughters, represented this evening by Ceci Leonard and Josephine Hart. So, founded in 2019, Radical Daughters is a group of performance artists and educators in Germany who use political art to inspire people to act and stand up for ideals such as democracy and equality. And as a group, they hold interdisciplinary workshops geared towards teenagers and young adults that focus on the function and meaning of democracy, as well as the importance of our participation in it. We have with us Ceci Leonard, the founder of Radical Daughters. Early on, she was active in the hip hop scene as a graffiti artist and rapper. And until 2019, she was a part of the Center for Political Beauty. She's the mother of 2 children. And overall, Ceci works at the intersection of art, design, politics, and education. And she's interested in building spaces in which political engagement and action can emerge. And we're also joined by Josephine Hart, who has served as the project manager and managing director of Radical Daughters since April 2019, overseeing a wide variety of the group's projects. And this is where her interests in democracy, sisterhood, and organizational talent come together. So our program tonight will consist of a 1-hour discussion with Radical Daughters, moderated by student council member Baruch, during which Lexi, Matt, Zora, and I will also pose questions to our guests this evening. And then our conversation will be followed by a short Q&A section in which our live audience here tonight will also have the opportunity to present any questions and comments to the Radical Daughters. And after our discussion concludes, Lexi will write the blog post for the Thomas Mann House website, which will be available after this viewing as soon as the interview is posted online. We'd also like to extend our thank you to Susan Horvitz and Rick Feldman for their generous support for this online and on-site discussion series with the Venda Museum and Thomas Mann House. Ceci and Josephine, it's a pleasure to have you this evening, and I'll pass it off to Baruch, our moderator, to begin our discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a wonderful introduction. And thank you again, Ceci and Josephine, for joining us tonight. The work by the Radical Daughters is so immensely necessary for accessing ways to combat and deconstruct systemic injustices. And it's a very creative way to go about understanding and choosing ways to deconstruct injustice. Before we dive into the discussion, could you please describe an example of one of your projects for any of the listeners who may not be familiar with your guys' work?
Yes, I would love to do that. Thank you for having us tonight. So basically, I founded Radical Daughters in 2019, coming from the Center for Political Beauty. And the Center for Political Beauty is a group Berlin-based, working with big media interventions, like a mixture between theater, maybe you could say, but also using film and especially also social media to tackle political issues in an artistic way. And I have been, during that time, often talking about the works of political beauty, and noticed during this time of just talking about the works, how the work of art doesn't only inspire people in the moment that they are viewing the work of art, but also me talking about it. So this inspiring that the art holds in it had this certain spark, a magical spark of getting people to want to become politically active themselves, even people who would never normally join like a party or would never even go and vote, for example. So this was kind of the starting point for us to found Radical Daughters. And I would say that what is unique to our work is definitely that we want to address people, not only youth and not only young people, in the sense also coming from German history and saying how important it is for us to engage in democracy, because it only needs a few fascists, a few anti-democratic people to really start something up that could all take us down. So we really need to engage people in politics.
Thank you, Ceci. So maybe in addition, when I look back on my youth, I've never was a person who was politically involved in my free time. So I wasn't really into political issues or anything. And it was not that I was not interested, I just didn't know how. And I keep thinking or asking the question, what would I have needed to change that? And I think this is where our work comes in with Radical Daughters. So we basically use action art as a very accessible tool to encourage political engagement. So we specialize on working on rural areas with young people, and we never bring any specific topics. So it's all very subject oriented. So when we start working with the young people, we always come and give a lot of questions. So what does make you angry? What you would like to change? How can we work with your topic and see how action art can be a tool to encourage yourself and being more politically active?
Thank you. I think the last part about sort of the workshops and kind of beginning like political engagement at a young age is like very important, because a lot of like systemic things that we are kind of faced with start at a young age, and you start to like see these problems exist from a young age, and being able to like be aware of those things is very important in like preserving a democracy, which is of the topic of Zora's first question for you guys.
Thank you, Prue. As he mentioned, to hearken on your beautiful description of your work, of course, it centers primarily around and towards the youth, doing civic work in schools and youth programs alike. And with this, I wanted to ask, what do you believe is the role of the youth within a democracy, and how specifically does Radical Daughters stay mindful of this role?
Well, youth is our future. So in that sense, if we have a disengaged youth that doesn't believe that things can change and that they can make a change, then democracy has failed in a way. And we see this in Germany, and I don't know about the US so much, but in Germany, for example, a lot of young people either don't go and vote, or they vote in Germany like a fascist party, the AfD, which is really rising in its numbers since 2017, since they have become part of the German Bundestag. So this is definitely a major problem. And also we see since Corona in Germany, the state has not been putting in as much effort as they should have into the working with youth. So we have a lot of young people who have suffer like mental issues, who feel depressed, who have no way of thinking of a bright future because the situation with climate crisis, with them not making enough money for their living, these are like just actual issues that have to be tackled. So I would say it's so important to put the youth on center stage in your work if you want to have a working democracy.
And that feeling of like grimness, or like this like ultimate pressure, like especially now with like how a lot of the world is becoming much more fascist, it like those sorts of moments like create like political engagement, or people to be willing to like fight things. Or so I have a question that kind of like turns that to you guys. What led to the conception of the Radical Daughters, and what like sort of moment that maybe you guys both have experienced that kind of like led you guys down this path to create the Radical Daughters?
Well, I kind of touched it slightly also before. I I really think as Germans, we would say, learning so much about our fascist history. The point of asking us the question, what could we have done to prevent Hitler, is something that I would say is in our DNA, and it played a major part in my upbringing, definitely, and it definitely politicized me. And the question of what does it take, as Josephine also said, what would it take for us as youth or even as society to take a stance, to become more politically engaged, and how can we do that? So I would say this is like the core inspiration to Radical Daughter, because what does it take to take action when it becomes crucial?
And I think for me personally, it's just always very inspiring to see how accessible action art can be. So even people who would say, oh, I'm not very interested into politics or anything connected to politics, I think that our tools, our action art tools, just can be a very easy and successful way of engaging people and make themselves feel powerful.
Carrying off of that, I think often when we hear the word radical, there can be this sense of opposition to the everyday, to sort of the routine. Sometimes the radical feels like a break from the routine. But at the same time, you're kind of describing everyday ways of living that end up becoming radical in themselves, just through the simple choices we make, the communities we build, those tiny little decisions that build up over time. And to look forward to your event this weekend, kind of build our compassion muscles that help us, grow our capacity to be radical and take political action. So I was just curious if you had any, and I know we'll do maybe a little exercise toward the end, but just for our listeners, what are perhaps some small steps that you're talking about that we can maybe start taking to begin working those muscles and develop everyday practices that are radical?
Mm-hmm. Funny that you ask, because we just published a Mutplaner in German, a courage trainer. So basically, this is a courage or an annual calendar where you can train to become more courageous and more politically active. And we developed a few little tasks and daily exercises for practicing, especially something like this. But unfortunately, it's only in German. So sorry. Until now, maybe we will change that. But of course, I would have some other tips what I think can help. And I would say the first thing always is doing something better than doing nothing. Because sometimes people are very scared of that if they do something, it's not so impactful. But I learned that if you don't do anything, for sure you will not have any impact at all. So it's always better at least to try. And the second thing would be, well, in German we say Bock auf Scheitern. And I would maybe translate it into English, like really enjoying to fail. Because if you do something, you probably will fail at some point, but I think it's all about learning from it and then doing it different the next time and maybe even better. And maybe another thing would be to make something very concrete, because that's a very big part of in our workshops. When people bring their topics, sometimes they're just very big. And the task will be to make something very concrete so you can start working on it. An example would be abolishing the patriarchy, which is a very big topic. And you could start by abolishing the gender pay gap in my company, or something just easier to achieve and therefore more encouraging. And then last but not least, I think it's very important that you look at what you're very good at and what you like doing. So for me, for example, I'm very good at Excel and I love working on my computer most of the time. So that's what I do a lot. And I think that's very important because if you want yourself to keep going, I think it has to be something where you can get a little joy out of it. Yeah, something like this.
I think sometimes people have a hard time picturing themselves joining a movement because they haven't yet seen something that they are passionate about or excel at, skills they have. They haven't seen what role that can play in the movement, but there certainly will be something. And it's just that process of actually finding, how your skills can contribute to these movements.
Yes, exactly, because we don't just need the people who stand in front of the camera or give the interviews or do radical actions that are radical. We need the people who write in the background, who organize, who do all these different works. So yeah, I think it's also good to give like this picture, what can political engagement look like and what are all the different colors to it.
And you have a jumpsuit for each color.
Yes, yeah. So these are our working outfits. We're working for democracy, we say. And yeah, we have different color outfits. Today I chose the purple one. I'm pregnant, so I can only wear the purple one at the moment because it's the biggest one. Yeah, but I might switch back to the green one soon. Yeah, but maybe also, I don't know, you were talking about courage. Or how can you train courage? And I have always have the feeling that sometimes we think we are either a courageous person or I'm not a courageous person. And with our work, we try to inspire people to take a different stance towards courage, to think of courage as something that you can definitely train. Like it's a muscle and I can become extremely courageous and I have to work on it day by day, as you were saying, like with little things, like with our training method, for example, but also, yeah, just as democracy is not like finished, democracy is always a process. So we always need people engaging and forming it all the time, again and again. It's the same with courage as well. And I think if we have this different mindset to it as something fluent, formative, that helps definitely. And to see yourself as somebody who can take a part in it.
These like ideas of like courage and then like the like workwear and all this stuff, I feel like it's very like creative and like a very like new way of like thinking of like political action or like working towards political action. And so Lexi has a perfect question about kind of the elements or characteristics of action art.
So the presence of the word radical is very central to your work. Radical daughters, radically rebellious, radically democratic. When I think of the word radical, I usually think of the words severe and change. What does the word radical mean for your organization? And does this word have a different connotation in German rather than English?
So the word radical comes from the Latin word radix, which means root. So basically, we mean it in tackling something from the deep. And I think that's very important for our understanding of acting radical. Like, how can we question the status quo, and how can we not just simply accept given circumstances, and maybe how can we push a change through art, in this case through action art, and how can we kind of reform society with our radical daughters. And I think the interesting thing for myself about the word radical is that it becomes a different meaning if you use it the word in a different sentence. Like, for example, if you use radical for radical tenderness or radical self-care or radical daughters, it's a very empowering and encouraging word or term. But you can also use this word, or many people do, to emphasize something very harmful, and that's not our way of understanding this word.
Earlier, you guys spoke about sort of inspiring the youth and creating like an environment for them to want to engage in creating and preserving democracies. And I want to kind of turn that idea onto you guys. Like, there's a lot of different political organizations that kind of like run in parallel, both in the past and in the present, that kind of engage in your guys, like in similar forms of like political engagement and education as you guys. And Sarah has a wonderful question, kind of goes along the lines of that.
Yeah. Well, earlier you said democracy is a process, and I really like that, and I really agree with that. And I think what comes along with that is that there's a rich history to it as well. And you also discussed the idea of failing, and the necessity of failure to get better at something. And I think part of that process is also looking to the failures of people who have come before you. So kind of going along that idea of history, well, many of us here might be familiar kind of with the work of creative political action groups throughout history, such as the example that comes to mind for me is ACT UP, which were founded in response to the AIDS crisis. So I was wondering if you could discuss any groups, collectives, and organizations throughout history that have had a notable impact on the work of Radical Daughters.
Yeah, well, just a really recent one that comes to my mind now is by the photographer Nan Golden. I don't know if you saw the movie or The Beauty and the Bloodshed. It's a documentary about her work as a photographer, but also then her work as an activist, fighting the opioid crisis in the US. And I think the organization she founded was then called PAIN. And it's really interesting to see, for example, her work, first of all, as an artist, but then also as an activist who was, involved herself in the opioid crisis and going against the Sackler family, who pushed the opioids onto the market in the US. And it's so inspiring to see her and their group going to all the major museums in Europe and forcing them to take the Sackler money out of their museum work, for example. So this is a great example where you see this David against Goliath moment. That is a lot. You see this a lot in like political art, where you have these small artists. They will definitely fail, or most of the time they will fail, because the goals they want to achieve and the issues they're tackling, they're so big, but still they do it and they go for it, and sometimes they would be successful. And I think different artists that I love, for example, Christoph Schlingensief, or we love him. He's a he died, but he's a theater maker, and he always pushed the boundaries of what we think theater is and where theater takes place, and how the audience would expect theater. And he's like an enfant terrible. And I think what maybe combines these people who inspire our work is this David against Goliath moment, then moments of pushing boundaries of all different fields. Is it filmmaking or theater making? And also this wanting to tackle bigger goals than oneself, and not doing art just for art, but for a cause that is greater, maybe.
That reminds me so much of your previous organization's work, the Center for Political Beauty. And something that struck me as I've read about them and studied them was this phrase that you would arm reality with the power, the arm reality with moral fantasy and the power of history. And I was just thinking when you were explaining the power of art right there, it's not necessarily in the political victory, like the overcoming of, the Sackler family did not, repent in, ashes, and they still quite formidable, but we're able to look at these examples in history that are able to expand our imagination. And that triggered that sense of moral fantasy that you saw was so important in your last institution. I was just curious if you could maybe define more what you meant by moral fantasy and how that continues to inspire your work.
Well, I would take out the part, what I think is absolutely crucial for democracy and also for an idea what future could look like, is the idea of having fantasy, having fantasies as society, and forming narratives through fantasies. And I see it a lot, and that's why it's so important to do this artistic work with youth who would normally maybe not go to a museum, for example, or would not normally go to a theater, is to inspire them that they as well have the right to have an imagination and an imagination and a fantasy about what future could look like, and that they can form it themselves or design it themselves, you could say. So in that way, this point of imagination plays a big role, because it's still the question who is allowed to tell the future and whose voices are being heard, and what futures should be told and what voices should be heard. And in that sense, art can be a way of telling these futures, because, as you said, these ideas of political beauty, the work I did before, is very much, we didn't stop the AfD, the fascist party, staying in the German Bundestag with a work of art that we did, but still we created these fantasies and ideas that we could possibly make a change.
I think that's like really cool. Like the imagination only is imagination until it is like created and grounded in our real world. And I think like art has a very unique access to the imagination where everything is possible. You touched on that, and I think that's just like really amazing. And I like even action art. It's like this perfect way to inform somebody of what is possible, as long as like you stay politically informed and engaged, and you work towards like creating and like protecting our democracies. And Lexi has a question that kind of goes along the same lines of what like the features of action art or the elements.
Thank you. So I just wanted to know, what key elements make an action artistic protest more effective than traditional political activism, and how might this new approach engage wider audiences and communicate its message a little more powerfully?
I think sometimes we don't like to talk so much about the effectiveness of political engagement, because, as Josephine already said so well, sometimes this keeps us from going the first step. Like if we already in the beginning ask ourselves, but what impact will I make by, I don't know, painting a picture of or going on the street, then this is very, it keeps us, it takes the drive away. So I would more put the emphasis on fun and humor, and it has to become like something sensual again to become politically involved. And I think that's where maybe artistic activism and action art comes in because it has something, it engages us on an emotional level more. And then the other thing I would say is also, I think we live in a time where we can't take away artistic approaches to communication anymore. Like, for example, you have Greenpeace, for example, they have always known how to work with images and impactful images to communicate their political ideas or their fight, what they were fighting for. And then you go to TikTok, for example, or to all kinds of social media, and you have images, you have music, you have videos, you have speakers. So storytelling is just absolutely a thing. So yeah, I would just say, I think you have, you see artistic, methods in a lot of different, protest forms.
Art is like a big part of this. I feel like we've been talking about art for like the entirety, and it's like just like a perfect way of like protest. And Zora kind of has like a question about the link between being in school for art and then the formation of the Radical Daughter.
Yes, as I guess someone in the arts myself, I was very intrigued to find out that I think you both have a bit of a background in the arts, and I wanted to know what was your trajectory from attending school for the arts and then later discovering a passion for politics and artistic activism in your career, because personally that's also something I'm very interested in as an artist, so I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, I will answer this because Josie, she had studied something very different. She can tell you all about it later on. Yeah, but no, I think before I studied arts or went to art school, I was already deep into hip hop culture. Like when I was 15 and German hip hop culture. And when I was 15, I started graffiti writing, and then I started writing rap texts, and I had a female band. So this was already for me very political then, because it was an all guys scene in Germany. I don't know about here, but still it was very, very male dominated, and just that already had something very political to it. And I think I was never interested in this arts for the arts take towards arts. I was always interested in what does art provoke in me and provoke in others and provoke in society, and how does it rub things up. Like, this was always part of it. So I think I would have never gone into politics, for example, and I wouldn't have gone into political education myself as well. I would always see myself as an artist, but always was always interested in working this intersection. But what about you?
Me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a musician, I agree. Like, I mean, I'm a classical musician, but honestly, like, all forms of music seems to be pretty male dominated. And I think I agree with you when you say there is almost a sense of like radicality. I don't know if that's a word in that as well, just being like a woman, like in a male dominated art form. But for me, I mean, I also like to write and like poetry in particular, and I'm very interested in just writing things that has like a social justice or like identity like lens on it, and I try to incorporate my identity or just like community or just like just what I believe in general when it comes to writing, and I love consuming simultaneously like art that has to do with that. So I think, I mean, last year, our theme, the political mandate of the arts, I feel like we talked all about this, and I feel like the common like answer from all the artists we spoke to, we all seem to agree that like there is a certain like sense of radical in just creating art, especially like within, you know, the times we find ourselves in where there's almost like some sort of war on the arts in a way. So yeah, I think I agree with you when you say it's like there's like a provocation in that. So
Sort of moving away from like art, Matt has a question about the space that both men and women deal with in creating and preserving democracies.
Well, it's touching sort of on your conversation that you were having earlier on your work with German youth and that feeling that a lot of them had where maybe they're primarily disaffected or, you know, turning slightly to the right. Here in the States, I would say the narrative is more Gen Z and Gen Alpha are maybe largely more progressive, but also have a strong feeling of maybe you know, separating themselves from politics or not wanting to engage in it. But I've also been seeing some studies recently, both in the States and in Europe, that there's actually quite a gender divide where Gen Z and Gen Alpha are maybe more generally progressive, but that's predominantly the women. And then the men tend to be actually drifting more toward fascism or fascist adjacent influencers and kind of chauvinist spaces. So I was just curious in your own work as you know, you're engaging the youth. Have you found that divide to sort of exist? And what are perhaps ways that you've been able to both empower like women's voices in a still patriarchal society while also providing spaces to maybe catch some of the men that might otherwise find themselves drifting toward people that would reaffirm patriarchy or reaffirm the chauvinism?
Yeah, so these studies we read them as well, and they came out now in early 2024. Really interesting, and I think we were talking about this earlier, that this is definitely a part for us to consider from 2025 onwards to maybe even focus more on a male predominant group, especially. I think in our work, like the work we do in schools and especially with apprentices, we work a lot with male youth, I'd say, and sometimes even with groups only male youth. And this is quite important work because also it's important for us to go into schools because people don't choose to work with us in that moment, but they are, yeah, you could say,
They get exposed to your work.
they get
Yeah.
exposed to our work, and they wouldn't normally in their free time, as Josie said, engage in political groups or go to organizations, whereas our name, Radikale Töchter, Radical Daughters, kind of empowers more young female people to engage in our work and with us. So yeah, what would you say?
Yeah, I think because of our name, a lot of times people believe or suppose that we only work with females or like have a focus or a specific topic about feminism, but that's actually not the case. It's like for us it is, but we basically work with everyone, like being a young adult and above. So as Ceci said, I think this is something very interesting as a question and maybe something we consider like developing a program on for the next years.
Yeah, but also like our main focus is more on empowering those to speak up for democracy and against chauvinism, then trying to convince those who maybe are already chauvinistic of the opposite. So yeah, this is just more our focus.
I think that's helpful because you have a limited number of resources, and so you are able to say this is kind of our lane, and here's how we're going to do it, like as well as possible. But yeah, I'm interested to kind of see how you move forward with that because hopefully there might be some other organizations you're able to partner with, or just might create some really interesting partnerships. But I like I like the way you framed that.
Thanks. But you work in youth as well, don't you? And
I
what
used
is
to,
your
yeah.
experience?
Similar. I mean, there's just often this crux where young men realize that there are certain ways of being men or being male that are no longer, that they have often been, like the media they see, and so a lot of the structures support this particular version of masculinity. But then often if they're in communities that care about justice and issues like that, then there's other values that actually go against the things they're seeing in maybe media, or that maybe they're learning in songs or seeing in politics, and there can be this cognitive dissonance between things they're hearing that they should value and then maybe the on the ground values they're experiencing. And there's this very volatile moment that we kind of saw in their teen years where it could really go one way or the other. And it was for the times that were successful, it was more about combining sort of like showing that there is so much power and meaning and purpose in being kind, right? In being gentle, in actually destabilizing oppressive structures, that's a way of using strength and of showing strength rather than necessarily of weakness, which is often the way that is derogatorily described by the right, that these are forms of emasculization and of femininity, and that's a threat to men. And so finding ways to demonstrate, both like the beauty and the strength of collaborating in order to defend against sort of these destructive forces like the patriarchy, rather than saying, no, you just don't, look away from that. You can't have that. You just have to like stay in your, stop. Like that's not giving them anything to live for. So finding things beyond just prohibition and denial, and giving something to actually live for that's constructive and feels powerful was often a central part of it. And honestly, art was a huge part of it too. The power of creation and of imagination and of collaborating in that way was actually responded to really well by the youth that I worked with.
The like this idea of collaboration is like so necessary in creating like change, effective change, or even like living in like societies that we dream of that are kind of in perfect peace. And so Sarah has a very interesting question about your guys' understanding of collaboration.
Well, you spoke a little bit about the potential to, I guess, work with other organizations, hopefully, and kind of expand your impact. And in an interview I read about you guys in Der Standard, you point to the necessity of coexistence between movements, especially those that adopt like different methods of protest than your own, and sometimes even to different ends. So kind of given the strong artistic perspective of Radical Daughters, what would be your approach to coexistence, collaboration, and coalition building with other groups and methods?
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting because this interview is also in Germany. I don't know if it's like this in the US as well, but different groups are always played out against each other. So there's the more radical group, and then they ask you, like, is that still okay to be that radical? And we try to explain how important it is to have a lively and thriving democracy, that we have all these different parts. Like we need the institutional parties just as we need the people on the streets and the artistic groups, and sometimes even more the more extremist groups to challenge the status quo. So we need everything, and everything works out fine in a democracy as long as it's working and it's balancing everything out. So stop playing people especially active people out against each other, because I can't emphasize it enough. The problem is not that some people are active in a democratic way. The problem is mainly that too many people are inactive and shrugging their shoulders and just saying, oh, well, whatever. So collaboration is a big part, but as an artist, we feel it's sometimes not as easy to collaborate in the artistic sense, because you know exactly what your work of art is going to look like. So you have your very close team of maybe a camera person and a writer and maybe actors to do your role, but still then in a broader sense, you can definitely collaborate. So you can get people to share your work on social media. We can go to demonstrations, or we go to demonstrations. And also, especially in rural areas, this is a huge importance, or it has a huge importance to collaborate with each other, because people are singled out often. They're alone fighting for the climate, for example, or for rights of minorities. So they need people from different parts of the country collaborating and supporting each other. And I'd also say that it's important to have unlikely allies who maybe don't support your cause 100%, but still are going in the right direction towards democracy, for example. And if we are there too choosy, can you say that? Too choosy with your allies, then we will be very single fighting for our causes, and it won't work.
Maybe in addition, I think for being very successful in your political education, it's very important that you have trust and longevity. So for us, it's very important to collaborate in rural areas with different political education institutional persons, because they most likely know the young people, and that's very important if you want to work with them, that you have someone, that you have like a community builder, and that you can rely on them, so you can start working all together.
Someone who's already earned trust with the community you're going to work with, rather than feeling like you have to do all that work yourself.
Yeah, it spares you a burden and actually makes things more effective. That's really smart.
Yeah.
We're sort of nearing the end of our interview, and I wanted for the last question to kind of turn it on to all of us, not you guys. Zora has a great question about what maybe we could do.
I feel like the time flies so fast, but thank you for such a engaging interview. But yeah, finally, I guess I think a great note to end things on, given all the topics we covered. I guess I wanted to know, how do we be radical in our everyday lives as students, artists, young people, or just civilians in general, especially within these times?
I'd say it's important to have a greater goal and values, something that is important to oneself and to society, and to act on that and try again every day to take it like a sports person. If you fail in it, get up again, but to not forget these values and to not become too cynical. Because I would really say, and to actively engage in hope, to see it as something active that I can learn every day. Yeah.
Thank you again, Ceci and Josephine, for this wonderful and insightful conversation. We at the Venda are so thankful for this moment and really appreciate being able to share in this profound feature of social action towards a better, free, and more democratic society. I also want to thank my fellow student council members and remind everyone listening that next month on August 28th, we will have the pleasure of talking with Irfan Nuruddin, and RSVPs for the online discussion will come out in the coming weeks. Thanks again all for joining us both here and virtually for this installment of Democracy and Vulnerability.